Okay, so I had a chance to look over your lesson, specifically like the word work part that you had asked that I come in and observe. So do you just want to talk a little bit about what data you used to decide that this was a skill that needed to be worked on with your tutees?
Yes. So in one of my comprehension lessons last week, I noticed when I was kind of conferencing with the students individually during their independent reading time, I would kind of like question them about certain words, and they were very honest, and they said that they read the word but had no idea what it meant, and then didn't even stop to think about it or anything. And so I was like, oh, well, that's really, not what good readers do. We need to stop and reread and use our context clues. And so I wanted to put the context clues lesson in place, so that way it could be carried over into my comprehension lessons. So today, actually, during word study, we did focus on context clues and how to identify context clues within a sentence, and looking before and after the unknown word, looking for antonyms, synonyms, and those types of context clues. And so we started with that today, and then transferred it, like I said, to our to their reading during the comprehension portion of our time together. But it was funny because actually today when we were doing the context clues activity, one of my students, it was the word expunge, and she already started to use the word part. She was like, oh, well, expunge, X is like expel, so it must mean to go away or to leave. And so I was like, oh, great, yeah, like that's exactly what, that's also what good readers do. We weren't really focusing on the word parts today, so I thought it was like good that I was already thinking ahead for my lesson tomorrow, which will be to focus on using word parts in addition to context clues to determine the meaning of unknown words.
Right, okay, so you used that, observation when they were doing reading last week that this is a good skill to work on for this week. So you said that you're going to review context clues in the beginning, so how do you see that playing out?
So we did an activity where we read just isolated sentences, and sorted them based on the types of context clues that they noticed within the sentence. So do they notice an antonym or a synonym or an example? So I'm thinking we could do another one of those, kind of like as a quick review. And they enjoyed it because it was like kind of interactive, hands-on. So we could do one sentence each where we use the context clues and review our anchor chart and the types of context clues that there are, and then move into the word parts.
Okay. And then I saw that you are going to have them use a graphic organizer with, figuring out those unknown words. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you see that going?
Yeah, so the graphic organizer is going to allow the students to kind of break apart the word into the separate word parts. So into the prefix, the root word or base word, and the suffix. And it's not coming up right now, but and so I think that'll help them to be able to determine, like, okay, what is this prefix? If it's re, okay, so re, to do again. And it'll help them to kind of analyze each word part separately, so kind of just spreads out the word for them visually, and then gives them a section to kind of determine, okay, so this is the prefix, the root word, what's my final meaning of this word based on what I know about the prefix and the root.
So the graphic organizer is just kind of like scaffolding support for them to help them kind of break it apart and break it down for them.
Yes. And to give them that, I think that visual of like physically writing the word into different parts is going to be helpful.
Okay. So what would you do in the case that, so if they're breaking apart the word but then they don't like know the meaning of the prefix, how will you support them in that?
And I was thinking about that when I was planning this, and I was like, wait a minute, there's so many prefixes, so many root words, like how am I going to... So what I did was I have a chart that I'm going to supply them with, and it just gives some of the most common prefixes and their meanings, suffixes and their meanings, and then I'm going to have that as support during our practice time when I'm going to give them a word and we're going to practice putting it onto the graphic organizer, and then using these charts that supply them with some of the meanings, can we determine the meaning of the word based on the word parts.
Okay.
So I think that'll help. Because I had the same concern when I was planning.
Right, since there are so many different ones.
Right.
You can't expect them to
know them all.
Yeah. Right. So then I guess on the other hand of that, if you'll have that support if they're not understanding that, but if they're, like, grasping it really easily, have you thought about what you would do in that instance?
Yeah. I suppose if they are, I could kind of further their thinking and ask them to break apart a word that is, multisyllabic, and maybe try to find one that they might not know the meaning of the prefix or the suffix, and use those kinds of words to help further their thinking. Or what I'm going to do is, I have a passage that they're going to read from, like a really short one, so it's kind of like applying the strategy with a connected text, so not just in isolated words. So seeing how they do with that. So like, okay, so we've used them separately, now let's see, can you apply that within a reading? Okay. So.
Right, so, yeah. So moving from, in isolation to the text.
Yes.
And, okay, if they're understanding what they're doing.
Right.
So then how do you see the lesson closing?
So I think after the girls have some time to practice breaking the word into parts and determining the meaning of the word based on the parts, I want to give them both some time to practice this within a text, and then do that, primarily independently with minimal teacher support, but then come back together to share our thoughts about, okay, well, now that we've had a chance to read and you've had a chance to use your graphic organizer to break the word into parts independently, what have you determined as the meaning of the unknown words, and kind of like what was your thought process? So kind of having that reflective piece where they discuss the steps that they took during that short reading.
Okay. And you had said so that they're going to determine the meaning of at least one unknown word. So is that a word that they've chosen?
So the passage does, and I could, retype the passage. It has certain words underlined, but I think I might take them out, and that's a good idea to have them just like read it, and if they come across, because there are words I know like that are gonna be unknown to them within this little passage, and so I think that would be a good idea, is to just have them come to the decision of what word is unknown on their own, as opposed to like underline, like obviously these are going to be tricky words, so more authentic in that way. So.
Okay, so you'll work together to, break apart the words and use that graphic organizer, and then they'll have time to practice on their own, and they'll pick out on their own without the underlined.
Yeah.
And then they'll share their thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think would be helpful for me to look at for you?
So I'm still thinking I need to improve my student talk time. So I was wondering, and I know we had before done the actual talking what they actually say, but maybe we could time it.
Okay, so time
how much time the students are talking, and maybe we could just focus on, obviously not the modeling part, but the guided practice, independent practice.
Okay.
I don't know, that might be hard, but just to like see, because I feel like I jump in too much and I talk too much, so maybe timing how much the students talk during the guided practice portion, and then during after they independently read and determine the unknown word, that next piece where they talk about what they found and how they determine the meaning of the unknown word. Because even during the reflection, I feel like I jump in. It's like, that's what they're thinking. But,
so let me make sure I'm going to time when the students are talking. Do you want that to be by student or just...
It could be just either.
Together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I'll do that for the guided practice, and then I'll also time them when they're doing their independent sharing.
Okay. Yeah. And then I guess I would just need like a comparison to if I'm like how much time I'm talking as well, right? So, to know if it was more or less.
So so how would you want me to do
We could do the whole, like time the whole thing, and then, or starting at the guided practice portion to the end, and then, from that whole time, how much was actually student talk.
Okay, so I'll time the whole thing from guided practice until the end of the lesson.
Yes.
And then from there, I will pull out what was teacher talk and what was student talk.
Great.
And then in terms of just like presenting it for you, just a chart.
Yeah, I guess it could just be like, out of these 20 minutes, during the guided practice, the students were talking for 10, or the students talked for 5, and then didn't talk, and then, I don't know, I guess a chart in that? I think I'm describing a chart, maybe?
I think so.
I don't even know what I'm picturing.
Okay, so that sounds good.
Yeah.
So I'll focus on the time with teacher talk and student talk.
Okay.
All right, I look forward to seeing you.
Thank you.